So, good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Julian Weisraben, and I am also Raven Caldera of Hubbardston, Massachusetts, and we are part of the original militia that was sent from Hubbardston to Boston during the early part of the Revolutionary War. And we're here in Templeton to do guard duty and remind everyone of history. And I'm actually the surgeon for the unit. I'm not a real doctor, but I do very much enjoy all forms of history, including medical history, and I joined up to be the doctor and have a lot of fun, and we do have a lot of fun. I'm also the tailor for the group, so historical costuming was also one of my hobbies, and so they loved that, and I love the period, and I think it's wonderful, it looks great, and so we slowly are adding costumes to everyone, adding some garb for everyone, so that we can have as authentic a group as possible. Well, mine's mostly linen, actually. And in fact, linen was the most common fabric for clothing at that time. They had cotton, but it was sometimes expensive to import, especially when there were embargoes on British trade at the time. And wool, of course, was also very popular. Didn't have the lovely synthetics of today. Mine is more of a middle class, upper middle class outfit. The gentlemen here in the militia, they range from what would be like farmers' sons, and somewhat lower on the totem pole and upwards.
I'm Captain Hilary Scott, Jr., and I'm the commander of the Hubbardston. Washington did not care for the militia at all. But then Washington turned it over to Nathaniel Greene, the militia. He turned around and turned the militia into a real fighting unit. The Minutemen became mostly sharpshooters and harassers. The Minutemen, once they were organized by Greene, Washington got to liking them. What they did was they put the militia up front to harass the British. They'd harass the British and fire and run away. Now the British expected them to run away, so they ran after them. Well, on the other side was the Continental Army waiting for them. So the British would run right into the Continental Army. And then what they kind of did was they broke the militia up into Minutemen companies, all right? That was in 1774. Worcester County actually was the one that started it. They broke the militia companies up. You had to be under 30 and really patriotic and ready to go in a minute. That's how they got their name.
This is the 13th year we've been holding this celebration. We have extra militia this year. We have 8. Last year we only had 4. They seem to be very excited about participating. It's a great thing for the country to come together and keep politics out of it. It's a wonderful thing, and hope everybody enjoys it.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the town of Templeton and the First Church of Templeton, let us all welcome you to our 13th annual reading of the Declaration of Independence today. During the last 5 years at this event, it's become somewhat of a tradition to take a few moments and speak about one of the lesser-known signers of the Declaration. So today I'd like to introduce to you George Wythe of Virginia. Born in 1726 at Chesterville, the plantation operated by 3 generations of the Wythe family in what was then Elizabeth City County, but is now Hamilton, Virginia. His father, Thomas Wythe, died when George was 3. But his mother, Margaret Walker Wythe, was an extraordinarily well-educated woman of the day, and she tutored him in the classics in a manner that would take him far indeed. She instilled in her son a love of learning that served him throughout his entire life. In fact, as an old man, having long mastered Latin and Greek, he took up new subjects, such as learning to speak Hebrew. George's mother died when he was still a teenager, and he entered College of William and Mary, but was unable to keep up with the fees. He dropped out and managed to secure a study of law at his uncle's office, who was Stephen Dewey. His studies were so successful that he was admitted to the colony's General Court Bar in 1746 at the age of 20. Wythe first participated and practiced in Elizabeth County and later then with a prominent lawyer, Zachary Lewis. And in December of 1747, Wythe married Zachary's daughter, Anne. And the next year would be a roller coaster ride of emotions. Less than 1 month after their December wedding, Wythe was admitted to the York County Bar in January of 1748. However, 7 months later, on August 8th, and less than 1 year after they wed, his wife Anne died. 2 months after that, in October, the young widower was appointed to the clerk of the Committee of Privileges and Elections at the House of Burgesses. 7 years later, in 1755, he was elected to represent Williamsburg in the House of Burgesses, where he served until it was dissolved on the eve of the Revolution. His most valuable contribution to this new nation was his involvement in education. Ironically, the man who could never gain a degree because of want of money to get it became America's first law professor. This began in 1759 when he was elected to the Board of Visitors at the College of William and Mary. That year, the 33-year-old Wythe had a fateful meeting with a 16-year-old college freshman. That college freshman, his name was Thomas Jefferson. A meeting that would establish our nation and forge an intimate bond of friendship and love that was to last for 47 years. Jefferson's father had died 2 years prior to his entry into the College of William and Mary. And Wythe and his second wife, Elizabeth Tollier, who had no children of their own, took a special liking to this brilliant but emotionally rudderless youth. And after completing his studies, Jefferson served as Wythe's law clerk for 5 years and sat in on state legislation sessions where he met George Washington, Patrick Henry, and George Mason, names who we all know now as infants. During his 20 years of teaching, Wythe admitted to no greater love than that of forming young minds. His students included future presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe, future senators Henry Clay and John Breckinridge, future Virginia judges St. George Tucker and Spencer Rome, and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall. Wythe initially taught students on a near individual apprenticeship basis, especially after his wife Elizabeth's death in 1787. Some private pupils boarded at Wythe's home and received daily instruction in classical languages, as well as political philosophy and law. Of all these men, Wythe remained closest to Jefferson, with whom he worked and corresponded many times in their ensuing decades together. In their friendship, together the two men read all sorts of other material, from English literary works to political philosophy to the ancient sages. In May of 1775, Wythe was elected to the Second Continental Congress as the Virginia delegate who was replacing George Washington, who was about to take command of the Continental Forces. With served for 2 years, voted in favor of the resolution and the declaration. In 1776, he was called back to Virginia in order to help form the new government. He was elected Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates in 1777, and the following year he was made one of the 3 chancellors of the state of Virginia, a post which he served for the rest of his life. George Wythe was a Republican in all things and a quiet abolitionist. He freed slaves and made provisions for their support until they could earn a living for themselves. One of these freed slaves was Lydia Ordnax, who chose to remain in Wythe's service. This generosity, however, would end in tragedy and cost Wythe his own life. Near the end of his life, Wythe wrote his will in favor of a grandnephew, his sister's grandson, George Wythe Sweeney. But he also gave generous bequests to his former slaves, including Michael Brown and Lydia Ordnax. A ne'er-do-well, Sweeney forged checks against Wythe's accounts to cover pressing debts, and hoping to avoid detection and inherit his great-uncle's entire estate, he resorted to murder. Strawberries or coffee seemed to be the vehicle in which Sweeney delivered the poison to both his great-uncle and to Michael Brown, one of the slaves to inherit part of the fortune. However, even though they endured 2 weeks of agony, both eventually succumbed to the poison. And while Wythe was laying on his deathbed, it was discovered that Sweeney had forged some checks, and it was brought to Wythe's attention. At which point, he revised his will, taking his grandnephew out of the will entirely. He died on June 8, 1806 at the age of 80 and is buried in St. John's Church in Richmond, Virginia, the same church where Patrick Henry delivered his infamous liberty or death speech. A grand jury indicted Sweeney for murder, but Sweeney went free because the jury concluded that only circumstantial evidence was against him and it was too weak to support a conviction. Unfortunately, no witness was able to testify to seeing Sweeney poison either the household's food or drink. The reason being that the cook, Lydia Ordnax, the former slave who stayed on to serve with, was in the kitchen at the time and did see him put something in the coffee and destroy some evidence in the fire. However, because she was a former slave and because she was not white, neither she nor any other African American was allowed to testify against a white person in court. George Wythe was a revered and a man of great honor and integrity. His signature is the first among the Virginia delegates on the Declaration of Independence. In fact, he was so highly respected by his fellow Virginians and the other delegates that they left a space for him to sign, as he was absent from the meeting the day the document was signed. And Thomas Jefferson wrote, and I quote, "No man has ever left behind him a character more penetrated than George Wythe. His virtue was of the purest tint, his integrity inflexible, and his justice exact. Of warm patriotism and devoted as he was to liberty and the natural and equal rights of all men, he might truly be called the Cato of his country. He was my faithful and beloved mentor in youth, and my most affectionate friend throughout my life." As we hear the words of the Declaration of Independence read today, let us all remember the life, dedication, commitment, determination, and sacrifice of not only George Wythe of Virginia, but also of his 55 fellow comrades who courageously signed their names and launched the birth of our nation. It is now my privilege to introduce to you Miss Brittany Stewart to perform America the Beautiful.
Oh, beautiful for Gracious God, we thank you for all that you do for us. Help us as we go through these days to truly recognize the sacrifice of all of those who have served our country, particularly those that signed this declaration, but also those who are serving our country now, who are out being sure that the freedom that was gained here is still ours, that we would remember that we are a nation under you, that you are guiding us in all that we do, that we might truly know your will for us as a people and as a nation. Help us as we go forward to truly understand that you are with us always, that you are one in us through your Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen. At this time, I would invite you, if you're able, to stand and sing our national anthem.
Let those here assembled know that the following has been enacted in Congress, July 4th, 1776. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which compel them to the separation.
You hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness.
Prudent
prudence indeed will dictate that government long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evil are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed.
But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government.
The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.
He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them.
He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only.
He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures.
He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within.
He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands.
He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount of payment of their salaries.
He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without consent of our legislators. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power.
He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury.
For transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing a free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies.
For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our legislatures, and
declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever.
He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation.
He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions.
In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people.
Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here.
We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity. We have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity.
We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold all mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends.
We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of our right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connections between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do.
And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Signed, John Adams of Massachusetts, Samuel Adams of Massachusetts, Josiah Bartlett of New Hampshire, Carter Braxton of Virginia, Charles Carroll of Maryland, Samuel Chase of Maryland, Abraham Clark of New Jersey, George Clymer of Pennsylvania.
William Ellery of Rhode Island, William Floyd of New York, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, Godwin Gwinnett of Georgia, Lyman Hall of Georgia, John Hancock of Massachusetts, Benjamin Harrison of Virginia.
John Hart of New Jersey, Joseph Hughes of North Carolina, Thomas Haywood Jr. of South Carolina, William Hopper of North Carolina, Stephen Hopkins of Rhode Island, Francis Hopkinson of New Jersey, Samuel Huntington of Connecticut, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia.
Francis Lightfoot Lee of Virginia, Francis Lewis of New York, Philip Livingston of New York, Thomas Lynch Jr. of South Carolina, Thomas McCain of Delaware, Arthur Milton of South Carolina, Lewis Morris of New York.
Robert Morris, Pennsylvania, John Morton of
Thomas Nelson Jr. of Virginia, William Baker of Maryland, Robert Treat Payne of Massachusetts, John Penn of North Carolina, George Reed of Delaware, Caesar Rodney of Delaware,
George Rux of Pennsylvania, Benjamin Rush of Pennsylvania, Edward Rutledge of South Carolina, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, James Smith of Virginia, Roger Stockton of New Jersey, Thomas Stone of Maryland, George Taylor of Pennsylvania, Matthew Thornton of New Hampshire, George Walton of Georgia, William Whipple of New Hampshire, William Williams of Connecticut, James Wilson of Pennsylvania, John Witherspoon of New Jersey, Oliver Wilcott of Connecticut, and George Wythe of Virginia.
At this time again, if you could stand, if you are able to sing our final hymn, God Bless America.
I'd like to thank Russ and Carol Stanley for your diligence in putting together today's ceremony. I'd also like to thank all the readers, the singers, our musicians, our special guests, Templeton Cable TV, and also the Hubbardston Militia, and everyone else who was involved in today's preparations. In a moment, I'm going to ask that the militia escort us all out onto the common, and I want to remind everyone there is an ice cream social that you all are invited to across the road on the common, as well as a militia demonstration. Everyone, please have a safe and enjoyable Independence Day, and may God bless you and God bless America.
Cast about. Charge your lock.
So she gets a lot of frequent flyer miles.
Oh, she had me in basement.
That's good.
Hoist your fire locks.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
Yeah.
Cock your locks.
So I'd love to get back to the swing.
Present.
After opens.
Give fire.
Say, that's what a pistol and a blunderbuss
Company
was all about.
dismissed.